Listen, this is a mission. There's a place, small on a map, that today holds one of the world's most dangerous advantages: mastery of the tiny brains inside our machines. Phones, cars, hospital devices, and weapons, many of them begin life in a handful of factories on an island. That concentration gives enormous benefit, but it also concentrates risk. Tonight, I'll take you through the human stories, the secret moves, and the policies that turn silicon into power. We'll follow the rise of an industry started by one man's radical decision in 1987. Watch rivals close in with money and covert methods, and examine worst-case scenarios that could cost the global economy more than $1 trillion. Stay with me, because this quiet center of modern life could become the flashpoint of the next great geopolitical shock. Start with a number, about 64%. That's the estimated share of the world's most advanced contract chips coming from one place. 2/3 of advanced chipmaking concentrated in a small region. It's not only a business fact, it's a geopolitical lever. When essential capacity sits in one place, every shipping route, every customs desk, and every power outage becomes relevant to nations across oceans. That concentration rewired how countries think about strategic risk. The world no longer treats chips like consumer parts. They are strategic assets, and assets attract contest. That is the background of our story. A quiet dominance that invites both investment and intrusion. To see how it started, we go back to one decision. In 1987, Morris Chang and a small group founded a firm that focused purely on manufacturing chips for others, the foundry model. Designers could innovate without building factories. Manufacturers could perfect production without shouldering risky design bets. It was a brilliant division of labor. Over decades, that single approach created an ecosystem of toolmakers, suppliers, and skilled technicians. The island didn't become dominant by accident. It became dominant because people there committed to mastery, precision, and continuous improvement. That human dedication is the engine, and it is what people try to hack, buy, or steal. Imagine a late-night shift in a wafer fab. Machines whirring, techs watching yield numbers like chess players watch a board. A subtle tweak, a pressure dial, a timing adjustment raises the output by a few percentage points. That small gain translates into millions of dollars and a competitive edge. These little, practiced moves are not in manuals. They live in the hands and experience of workers. That tacit skill is hard to export. You can buy a machine, but you cannot buy 20 years of shop floor know-how in a single purchase. When knowledge concentrates like this, it becomes a strategic advantage that others desperately want to replicate. While the island perfected its craft, others invested heavily to catch up. A large neighbor with massive resources set long-term goals: build domestic capacity, incentivize companies, and recruit talent. Money flowed into labs, government programs underwrote startups, and state actors backed rapid expansion. When speed becomes a national priority, governments accept bigger risks to achieve parity, and sometimes those risks include bending or breaking rules. That is where the line between fierce competition and covert appropriation blurs, when the prize is control of the world's technological nervous system. Talent migration is one of the most powerful but least visible instruments in this race. Offer a top engineer double the salary, a leadership role, and state-of-the-art facilities, and many will cross borders. Each engineer who moves carries nuanced procedural knowledge that shortcuts learning. That movement is not always illicit, but it shifts capability. For the receiving state, it's a gain. For the birthplace of that talent, it's a loss. Over time, the aggregation of small departures can change the balance of mastery in vital ways. That quiet brain drain is a strategic problem dressed as normal labor mobility. There are darker channels too. Cyber intrusions, targeted social engineering, and supply chain compromises have been documented in this sector. Attackers often begin with small suppliers, a consultant's laptop, or a contractor's forgotten credential, then move inward. When insiders are compromised or credentials leak, design files and process data can be exfiltrated. These aren't blockbuster heists. They are patient, surgical operations that accumulate advantage. In the semiconductor race, months of stolen know-how can erase years of painstaking effort. That's why companies now treat network security like frontline defense. Now, let's talk policy in simple terms. The US and allies implemented measures to reduce risk, subsidies to promote domestic fabs, export controls on the most advanced tools, and incentives to build capacity with trusted partners. The US CHIPS Act alone pledged tens of billions to the sector. Governments aim to create redundancy and friendshore certain capabilities. But factories cost billions and take years. You cannot substitute decades of experience with funding alone. That timing gap is a key vulnerability, a moment when tension can outpace policy. Now, let's talk policy in simple terms. The US and allies implemented measures to reduce risk, subsidies to promote domestic fabs, export controls on the most advanced tools, and incentives to build capacity with trusted partners. The US CHIPS Act alone pledged tens of billions to the sector. Governments aim to create redundancy and friendshore certain capabilities. But factories cost billions and take years. You cannot substitute decades of experience with funding alone. That timing gap is a key vulnerability, a moment when tension can outpace policy. Why does it matter to you personally? Because chips are in the things you rely on. Your phone's brain, the processor in your car, the server that runs hospital records, all are woven into daily life. If shipments slow, repairs delay. If prices spike, consumers feel it. If medical devices are delayed, healthcare outcomes can suffer. These are not abstractions in economics papers. They are tangible inconveniences and risks for households, businesses, and critical services. That's why decisions made in factories or ministries echo into living rooms and workplaces. Let's make this concrete with a scenario many modelers fear. A sudden blockade or regional conflict interrupts shipments for months. Factories go idle. Production schedules collapse. Companies scramble to find alternative capacity that simply doesn't exist at the same scale. Short-term shortages cascade into multi-sector slowdowns. Autos, consumer electronics, defense equipment. Economists estimate damage from some scenarios in the hundreds of billions. Worst cases can run into the trillions. Those numbers are rough, but they signal the same urgent point. Vulnerability scales geometrically when the system is tightly coupled. Time for a question to the listeners. If the choice is higher prices to build redundancy or lower cost and greater exposure, what would you accept? Be concrete. Think of your healthcare, your car repairs, your job security. Answer in the comments. This debate is not abstract. Public preferences shape policy. I will read the most thoughtful replies and incorporate them in a follow-up segment. Let's examine the military strategic dimension. Control of chips intersects with defense capability. Advanced semiconductors enable radar, guidance systems, and critical AI for command and control. If a state can deny advanced chips, it can delay an adversary's modernization. That is why chips are not only economic goods. They are strategic instruments in a broader security competition. This reality makes the sector a target for both espionage and deliberate disruption. Now, a sober scenario analysis. Scenario 1. Temporary disruption repaired in months, painful but recoverable. Scenario 2. Sustained cyber attrition and talent drain. A multi-year erosion of competitiveness. Scenario 3. A severe military action causing long-term physical damage to fabrication capability, a generational shock. The probability of each differs, but their impact is increasingly discussed at the highest policy levels. Preparing for all three requires agility. So what practical steps reduce risk? First, strengthen cyber defenses across the full supplier network. Second, increase workforce training and apprenticeships that build local talent. Third, create strategic stockpiles and emergency protocols. Fourth, coordinate internationally on export and emergency measures. These steps are expensive but cheaper than rebuilding an entire industry after a catastrophe. At the business level, design choices help. Build products with modular architectures that tolerate component shortages, enable software fallback modes, and allow substitution where possible. These engineering techniques are not glamorous, but they reduce fragility. Over millions of devices, small adjustments can significantly reduce systemic pressure during shocks. We must also reform the mentality of strategic sectors. Treat security and commercial success as co-equal goals. Incentivize secure practices through procurement preferences, audits, and partnership conditions. Reward companies that invest in resilience, not just short-term margins. Public procurement can drive industry behavior faster than regulations alone. There is also slippery ethics in talent recruitment. Aggressive headhunting that encourages knowledgeable engineers to leave critical ecosystems can accelerate capability transfer. Countries and companies must balance offering opportunity with responsibilities to global stability. That balance will test norms about labor mobility and national interest. Now a strategic glimpse into diplomacy. Allies coordinating on standards for secure supply, joint R&D programs, and emergency resource sharing could blunt the worst effects of a shock. Trust and interoperability take time to build, but they pay dividends in crises. Diplomatic investments in this domain are as important as defense budgets. We should also be honest about limits. No policy prevents every attack or shutdown. Nature, accidents, or deliberate acts can still cause damage. The goal is not zero risk, it's manageable risk. Preparing for manageable risk keeps economies functioning and saves lives. Before we close, let's bring this back to the ordinary person. What can you do? Learn about the technology that shapes your life. Vote for policy that balances security and prosperity. Support education that trains future technicians and engineers. For business leaders, conduct supply chain audits and invest in cyber and workforce resilience. These are concrete steps you can influence. Finally, remember the human thread that runs through all of this. Morris Chang and his colleagues made a decision decades ago that transformed our world. The systems people build can be defended or destroyed by human choices. Today's actions, in capitals, boardrooms, and classrooms, will shape whether chips remain small pieces of convenience or become the center of conflict. The choice is ours.
I'm Sudais.
If you're with me on this mission, subscribe, comment your stance on resilience versus cost, and share this conversation with someone who cares about history, war, and the future of technology.